Hey vinyl snobs out there, and vinyl community people, and vinyl friends and family. Let's talk about one of my favorite topics. Cheap records, crummy records, and cheap budget hi-fi and vintage hi-fi. Why do you need a cheap beat-up hi-fi system? You might ask yourself. Well, it's so fun to find these things at garage sales and Salvation Army and the Goodwill, thrift stores. I can't resist bringing them home and finding a home for them. Kind of like when you were a kid and the puppy dog was running down the street and you wanted to give it a good home. That's what I do. I like to give bad records, beat up records, and used and abused stereos. I like to find them a good home. So let's look at this stereo that I put together recently. I've had bits and pieces of this thing in my garage for the last many years, let's say. But let's start with the turntable, which I just picked up for $10, $9.99 at a thrift shop. It works fine. And this vintage receiver we're going to talk about too. Anyway, it's West Montgomery, obviously. Oh, it's a cheap beat-up record. It's not hi-fi, it's not ultra hi-fi, but it's satisfying. It's fun. I get a lot of satisfaction when cheap, broken things do what they're supposed to do after 50 years and they're still usable. To me, that's part of the fun of record collecting and hi-fi collecting. So anyway, this turntable, I've never heard of this brand before. MGA, I don't know if you can see that. MGA, that's Mitsubishi made turntables. I didn't know that. But brought it home. It seemed to be working, but when I put the record on, it was squeaking, making a really weird every rotation. Some weird sound. And I thought, well, maybe the needle is scraping on the actual record, which is bad news because that's a good way to destroy a record. That wasn't the case at all. It actually needed a drop of oil. Not on the spindle, not on the center thingy, but way over here on the motor. This is belt drive, obviously. And the motor just needed a drop of oil on the spindle of the motor, and if you can stick it in there in such a way that it gets down into the shaft, the thing was cured with one drop of oil. So it's sad to see that somebody's got to throw away or get rid of a perfectly good piece of a gear because it needs one drop of oil. But literally there's tons of hi-fi out there that's neglected because it's not well maintained, and it needs something simple like a drop of oil or magic potion, the magic elixir for old hi-fi, which is the deoxit spray, which cleans up your knobs and your pots that get noisy. This is a great record. It's not a great record, it's a good record, and it sounds fine on here. Okay, back to the turntable. This turntable has the Audio-Technica, the AT3600L cartridge on it. It came with that cartridge. I didn't have to do anything to it. It's already aligned, it's already hooked up, it works fine out of the box. You clean it a little bit, and if it's crooked you gotta shove it back into where it's supposed to be. But a perfectly good turntable for $10. How can you pass that up? And then let's talk about the receiver. Oh, if you can see the receiver, this is a receiver brand I have never heard of. Spectrasonic. The Spectrasonic 2104, which probably none of you have heard of. I've never heard of it. And someone gave it to me, but they got it at a thrift store, so I'm going to assume it was about $25 or $30. The only thing it needed fixed was the lamps. The little light bulbs were all burnt out. So I bought some replacements. Luckily, they're the kind that snap into place like little fuses. Didn't require any soldering or wiring. But perfectly good receiver. Now, it needed some cleaning of the pots. With this stuff again, when you get that scratchy. You literally have to take the cover off and go inside and go to the back of these pots. I'll try to cover that in more detail in another video. I'm talking over a great Beatles thing, I'm sorry. So, we got the vintage receiver, works fine. There might be a little hum and a little hiss once in a while. So what? Get it fixed if you want to. And then the speakers. The speakers are ESS, which is considered a high-end brand. ESS used to make the AMTs, the air motion transformers, the Heil, Mr. Heil design, the AMT air motion transformer, is one of the most respected and crazy designs of in all of hi-fi. These have just regular old tweeters on them. So these are the ESS 602, or is it 620? A nice little bookshelf in its day. Nothing wrong with them. I got those for $4.75 at a thrift shop. The cost of this whole system, like 30 or 40 bucks. Plus I already spent 10 bucks on the little lamps. Okay, but cheap hi-fi is out there if you look for it. And the reason I think it's good to have cheap hi-fi at home is because cheap records are all around us. I love the cheap beat-up thrift store finds. Hopefully they're not beat up. You know, when you find a record for $2, $3 at the thrift store, you don't necessarily want to bring it home and put it on your best turntable with the expensive needle. And that's why it's nice to have a backup system where you can throw on something that's maybe not, you know, not as clean as you might wish it is. Let me explain why this is a good idea. I'd love to just sit and listen to this record, but I gotta talk to you guys on video. There's some little scratches and glitches and clicks once in a while. But this is a beat up record. It hasn't even been through a spin clean or ultrasonic cleaner. It hasn't been through any of that yet. But a record like this, I wouldn't want to put on an expensive turntable because I'd be worried that it's going to mess up the needle. But the other thing that might be surprising is a beat up record might sound better on a cheap system than it will sound on your high-end system. Why would that be possible, Greg? Well, let me tell you. The cheaper turntables tend to have the cheaper needles, the simpler designs that are not designed to pick up every little last bit of audio. That doesn't make any sense, Greg. Well, let me explain. The cheaper audio systems, the cheaper turntables have the simple needle design, the conical, the spherical, maybe the elliptical. Those needles are not necessarily digging the deepest into the groove to get the most sound. They're simpler to manufacture, but they're less likely to pick up the pops and clicks. I'm not saying all the pops and clicks disappeared, but if you were to play a beat-up record like this on a nicer system with a $500 or $1,000 needle, you're probably going to hear a lot of pops and clicks and stuff that you didn't want to hear. So if you're happy with playing a beat-up record on a beat-up system, it's probably going to be a better experience than a beat-up record on a great system. And I don't feel comfortable putting beat-up records on an expensive needle. My nicest needle over here cost more than at least 2 of my cars put together when I was in college. But here we are playing a $10 turntable and $5 speakers, and it's perfectly enjoyable. Did I mention the AT3600 needle on this thing? Sells for like 20 bucks. I see it on eBay for $18.95, all over the place. And Rega rebranded this needle, and they call it the Carbon for 60 bucks. This is the same needle that Rega puts on their $500 turntables, the RP1. So the other beautiful thing about these old vintage receivers is FM, right? How many people still listen to FM? Some people listen to it in their car, but most people have satellite radio and Sirius radio and all that stuff, which I don't have. I still listen to FM radio. Check out how nice this sounds. We're going to switch over to FM.
Thanks to my mom, actually.
Well, that's boring. That's the DJ.
And thankfully, there was a drum set.
But I usually leave it tuned to our local classical station, which has few, if any, commercials. They ask you for money once every hour, but they don't have a lot of annoying commercials. They're talking now, but beautiful old FM tuners.
I would just look over his shoulder and look at the way.
You got FM, you got AM, you got phono turntable for 20 or 30 bucks. And oh, the other thing, the reason I set this system up is so I could get the whole system together on camera and talk to you wonderful people out there in TV land. I want the speakers to be close enough to the microphone that they can pick it up. Let's go through some of the crappy records I have laying around that are good for this system, shall we? Let's see what AM sounds like while we're at it. Yeah, that's what you'd expect AM to sound like.
Answer. You are listening to the Dr. Wendy Wells Show. On
Dr. Somebody. Okay, let's go back to West Montgomery. Beethoven, Toscanini. Okay, he was one of the greatest composers of his day, but the records are old and beat up, and they're from like the late 40s or the early 50s. Seam split. Record is clean. It sounds fine on this turntable. It really does. But I wouldn't necessarily put it on my nicer turntable. You guys know I like spoken word, especially if they're talking about something of historical significance like JFK. Bob James. His stuff sounded good. You know, but you can see his records for $2 and $3 sometimes. You got to be careful if you're going to put it on a nice turntable. Bob James, Hubert Laws, Art Farmer, Eric Yale, George Shearing, Latin Lace, La Carumba. Who's she? Was she in the band? Did she play drums? I don't know. EMI Records, Middlesex, England. A cheap, old, somewhat beat-up record. Actually, it's in great shape. Do you guys know Jack Sheldon, the trumpet player, the voice of Conjunction Junction? The Warm World of Jack Sheldon on Dot Records. The Look of Love. This is like easy listening, guys. This is easy listening hour. That's what this system is about for me. This system is not about rocking the house. This is late night, easy listening. The Hawaii Five-0 soundtrack. It's not as good as I was hoping. I think I paid $5 for that. I like weird stuff, you guys. You guys know that by now. A Trinidad steel drum band. Who else would buy a record this weird? Here's a great record in terrible shape. Duke Ellington, live at Newport. Classic Duke Ellington. Everybody should have this if you're a jazz fan. $3.99. It's beat up, but it's good enough for this little turntable over here. In terms of crappy records, Rod McEwen is the king of crappy records, isn't he? I got a bunch of Rod McEwen. And I know Chris Prophy over there loves Rod McEwen. He talks instead of sings, and his songs are ridiculous. But there's something fun about listening to a crummy Rod McEwen album on a crummy stereo, because it brings me joy, right? As opposed to the audio file nervosa about people who spend $10,000 on their system. And it's not perfect, and you got to tweak everything to make it just... It's got to be a little more perfect. Just chill, relax, with some good tunes, inexpensive records, inexpensive everything. There's no stress. I'm not stressing about how this isn't acting perfect. I'm chilling with it. So that's the message for today. Chill out with some beat up, semi-crummy records on a semi-crummy system. Just enjoy the vintage vibe from another era. All this stuff is 40, 50 years old or more. It all works great, and it's going to continue to give decades of joy in the future, we hope. Oh, the lighting. Did I mention my lighting is rescued from my neighbor's trash pile? Who throws away vintage tiki party lights? They're gorgeous. They're original bulbs. Things got to be 50 or 60 years old. Alright guys. Happy dumpster diving. Have a great day. Thanks.